Srimad-Bhagavatam class on Tuesday, the 20th of July. Hare Krishna. Just start with chanting little Jai Radha Madhava. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 14, The Disappearance of Lord Kṛṣṇa. And today we are reading text 37. Yat Padasu Suṣeṇa Mukhya Kamana Satyadayo Dvasta Sahasrayoshita Nirjitya Sankye Chita Samtada Shisho Haranti Vajrayuda Valabochita Yat Padasu Suṣeṇa Mukhya Kamana Satyadayo Dvasta Sahasrayoshita Nirjitya Sankye Chita Shamstada Shisho Haranti Vajrayuda Valabochita Yat Padasu Suṣeṇa Mukhya Kamana Sajjadayo Dasa Nirjitya Sankhe Chitashams Tadashisho Haranti Vajrayuda Valabhocita Yatpada Suṣeṇa Mukhya Karmana Sajjadayo Dasa Nirjitya Sankhe Chitashams Tadashisho Haranti Vajrayuda Valabhocita. Yat, whose, pada, feet, Suṣeṇa, administration of comforts, Mukhya, the most important. Mukhya, the most important. Karmana, by the acts of. Satyādayaḥ, queens headed by Satyabhama. Dviasta, twice. 8. Sahasra, 1,000. Yoshita, the fair sex. Nirjitya, by subduing. Sankhye, in the battle. Tridashan, of the denizens of heaven. Tat Ashisha, what is enjoyed by the demigods. Haranti, do take away. Vajra Ayuda Valabha, the wives of the personality who controls the thunderbolt. Uchita, deserving. Translation. Simply by administering comforts at the lotus feet of the Lord, which is the most important of all services, the queens at Dwarka, headed by Satyabhama, induce the Lord to conquer the demigods. Thus the queens enjoy things which are prerogatives of the wives of the controller of thunderbolts. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Satyabhama, one of the principal queens of Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa at Dwarka. After killing Narakasura, Lord Kṛṣṇa visited the palace of Narakasura, accompanied by Satyabhama. He went to Indraloka also with Satyabhama, and she was received by Sachi Devi, who introduced her to the mother of the demigods, Aditi. Aditi was very much pleased with Satyabhama, and she blessed her with the benediction of permanent youth, as long as Lord Kṛṣṇa remained on earth. Aditi also took her with her to show her the special prerogatives of the demigods in the heavenly planets. When Satyabhama saw the parijata flower, she desired to have it in her palace at Dwarka. After that, she came back to Dwarka along with her husband and expressed her willingness to have the parijata flower at her palace. Satyabhama's palace was especially bedecked with valuable jewels, and even in the hottest season of summer, the inside of the palace remained cool, as if air-conditioned. She decorated her palace with various flags, heralding the news of her great husband's presence there. Once, along with her husband, she met Draupadi, and she was anxious to be instructed by Draupadi in the ways and means of pleasing her husband. Draupadi was expert in this affair because she kept 5 husbands, the Pandavas, and all were very much pleased with her. On receipt of Draupadi's instructions, she was very much pleased and offered her good wishes in return to Dwarka. She was the daughter of Satyajit. After the departure of Lord Kṛṣṇa, when Arjuna visited Dwarka, all the queens, including Satyabhama and Rukmini, lamented for the Lord with great feeling. At the last stage of her life, she left for the forest to undergo severe penance. Satyabhama instigated her husband to get the parijata flower from the heavenly planets, and the Lord got it even by force from the demigods, as a common husband secures things to please his wife. As already explained, the Lord had very little to do with so many wives to carry out their orders like an ordinary man, but because the queens accepted the high quality of devotional service, namely administering the Lord all comforts, the Lord played the part of a faithful and complete husband. No earthly creature can expect to have things from the heavenly kingdom, especially the parijata flowers, which are simply to be used by the demigods. But due to their becoming the Lord's faithful wives, all of them enjoyed the special prerogatives of the great wives of the denizens of heaven. In other words, since the Lord is the proprietor of everything within his creation, it is not very astonishing for the queens of Dwarka to have any rare thing from any part of the universe. Translation again. Simply by administering comforts at the lotus feet of the Lord, which is the most important of all services, the queens at Dwarka, headed by Satyabhama, induce the Lord to conquer the demigods. Thus the queens enjoy things which are prerogatives of the wives of the controller of thunderbolts. Om Ajana Timrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Umlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swaya Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As ever, amazing verse, amazing purport. Very hard to know where to start. Stated very clearly in the verse itself that, administering comforts at the lotus feet of the Lord, serving the Lord, pleasing the Lord, this is actually the most important thing in the life of anybody, actually, and obviously particularly the life of a devotee, because it's only devotees who are endeavouring to do that. But of course it is the most important thing for everybody. We just have to encourage them to come to that realization that serving Krishna, serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the most important thing. The Shravanam is given as the main ways to do that, but there are many different, nine primary ways, but many different ways that we can serve the Lord. But basically the goal being that we're pleasing Krishna by the service that we perform. Satyabhama here, who's very much focused on in this verse and purport, one of the chief wives, or primary wives, most main wives, if you like, of Krishna, did that to such a degree that she even had Krishna go to the heavenly planets to bring back this parijata flower for her to have it in her palace in Dwarka. So there are 10 principal wives for Krishna. Actually, Krishna had 16,108 wives in Dwarka. And that's referenced in here a little bit, because it says one of the principal queens of Lord Krishna at Dwarka, Satyabhama, and then it says after killing Narakasura, Narakasura is another name, Baumasura, who kidnapped all these girls, these young girls, and took them to and imprisoned them, if you like, and that came to Krishna's attention, and Krishna came to free them. And when Krishna came, all of these ladies, all these girls, they immediately surrendered to Krishna, and they desired to actually have him as their husband. And because in that sense they were kidnapped by somebody else, and they had no one looking after them, all that kind of thing, Krishna agreed. He agreed to accept them as his wives, and that's why he has 16,108 wives. in his pastimes in Dwarka. But Satyabhama, as it said here, is one of the principal ones. And then just before, because I think I will, it's obviously today to talk more a little bit about Leela and pastime rather than philosophy. But just to touch on philosophy, at the end of the purport, Prabhupada says, in other words, since the Lord is the proprietor of everything within his creation, this is about him bringing the Parijata flower back from the heavenly planets. It is not very astonishing for the queens of Dwarka to have any rare thing from any part of the universe. And so, as it's stated, because Krishna owns everything, the proprietor of everything, then why could he not, even though the Parijata flower doesn't exist on the earthly planets, why can Krishna not just bring it? Because Krishna owns everything anyway. And that's what Krishna did. So 529 in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhuktaram ya Gitapasham Sarvaloka Mahishvaram Sudidam Sarvabhutanam Nyatvam Mam Shantimrichati. That Krishna is speaking there, that a person in full consciousness of Krishna, he knows Krishna then to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, and he's the supreme lord of all the planets, and that's repeated many times in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Savasya Prabhuvo, and the creator of all the material and spiritual worlds. But anyway, that Krishna is the supreme lord of all the planets and all the demigods. So again, why would it be perfectly natural for Krishna to go to the heavenly planets and take the Parijata flower from there? So he's the lord of all the planets and the demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, not just devotees, not just human beings, but he's the benefactor of all and well-wisher of all living entities. And people who understand Krishna in that role, that verse is describing, they will attain peace from the pangs of material misery. The pangs of material misery. So that's the solution to our problem. I noticed also in the purple, it talks about Satyabhama's palace was especially bedecked with valuable jewels. Even in the hottest season of summer, the inside of the palace remained cool. So yeah, it'd be great to have loads of jewels. I'm assuming jewels somehow or another absorb heat and create a cooling atmosphere. Currently we're having an Irish heat wave, so we can be sure that it won't last very long. Of course, in the age of global warming, who knows? But we see actually that, and of course material life is described, samsara davanala lida loka, it's described as a blazing fire. That's the material life is described as a blazing fire. And we're seeing that very much in sort of clearly relatable terms, even for people who know nothing about Krishna, in terms of global warming and all the climate change or whatever is the appropriate term. Incredible temperatures in different parts of the world, etc., including what we're experiencing here. So it's just interesting that she had all these jewels that were creating air conditioning effectively in our palace like that. The pangs of material nature, understanding Krishna, who he is, that this is the way that we can get out of this fire, this intense heat of material life, by surrendering at the lotus feet of the Lord. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Satyabhama, who's focused on here, and how she came to become one of Krishna's wives, and as is described here, one of the main wives of Krishna. So, and I think it's mentioned in the purport that her father, doesn't it say it somewhere? This is when she went to Draupadi for instructions on, what does it say here? Sorry. Once, along with her husband, she met Draupadi. She was anxious to be instructed by Draupadi in the ways and means of pleasing her husband. And Draupadi was considered an expert on that because she had 5 of them, the Pandavas. Which is, just a short comment, is interesting because the concept of polygamy, which is a Vedic concept, and we won't get into it in great detail, but generally it tends to be seen as something that men like, to have lots of wives, etc. Of course, Prabhupada clearly points out that in order to do that, you have to be able to look after them. And we've just mentioned Krishna had 16,108 wives in Dwarka. He also had 16,108 palaces in Dwarka. So each of his wives had one of these incredible palaces. So you have to be properly able to look after the wives. But just interesting here that Prabhupada references Satyabhama going to Draupadi for advice on how to please her husband, because she had 5 of them. So it was Draupadi who was actually, in that sense, the one wife having the many husbands like that. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, Satyabhama. Oh yeah, and it says then she went there to do that, and then straight after that it says Satyabhama was the daughter of Satyajit. So Satyajit, he was a king living in the general jurisdiction of Dwarka, and he was a great devotee of Vivishvan, the sun god. That was his thing, and because he was a great devotee. And serve Vivishvan so nicely, just like Krishna went to the heavenly planets to get the Parijata flower for Satyabhama. Vivishvan awarded Satyajit this incredible jewel called the Shamantaka jewel, and this jewel was so effulgent. Coming from the sun god, naturally it would be so bright and effulgent like that. So Satyajit was given this jewel, but later on, there was a misunderstanding between Satyajit and the Yadu dynasty in relation to that jewel, with the kind of misunderstanding eventually being decided or settled when Satyajit voluntarily offered his daughter along with the Shamantaka jewel to Krishna. He surrendered both the jewel and his daughter to Krishna like that. So. And the story is that he got, as I say, he got the jewel from the sun god Vivishvan, and then he would wear this jewel in a locket around his neck. Must have been quite a big one actually, because I think the jewel wasn't small; it was reasonably big like that. But he would wear it like that, and effectively he appeared like an imitation sun god, because his jewel was just so effulgent like that, and. As I say, he was in the jurisdiction of Dwarka, and one time he actually came to Dwarka, and all the citizens in Dwarka thought that he had come to see Krishna, and they thought that because many demigods came. There's lots of different stories, Lord Brahma coming, etc. Many different demigods would come to Dwarka to see Krishna, so they kind of thought that. Sorry. They weren't thinking that Satyajit was coming to see Krishna. They thought, because he was wearing the jewel, they were thinking it was Vivishvan, the sun god. So they thought Vivishvan was coming to see Krishna like that. They thought that there was another demigod coming to see like that. So mistaking him to be the sun god, some of the citizens of Dwarka, they went to Krishna to inform him, that the sun god had arrived to see him. And the citizens, when Brahma would come or other demigods would come, now Vivishvan, it appeared Vivishvan was coming to see Krishna. They kind of, they took pride in this, that all these incredible personalities were coming to see Krishna, who was, living and residing in their city, their town, their city, Dwarka. But Satyajit hadn't actually come to see Krishna. That wasn't what he was doing. He was just, excuse me, he was just overwhelmed by the Shamantaka jewel, and more or less, to some degree was coming to sort of show it off. But he also was installing it, creating a temple, installing it in a temple, so the Brahmanas, his Brahmanas, if you like, could worship it and derive benefit and all of that kind of thing. And Prabhupada explains when relaying that pastime that this is an example of a materialist basically, and taking shelter in a material thing. And even though he's in the town Dwarka, where Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is residing, he's more enamored and more attracted by this material thing, powerful material thing, really opulent material thing, but nonetheless material. And is sort of seeing that as more important than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the citizens were thinking he's coming to see Krishna, but actually he wasn't coming to see Krishna. Krishna then, when he and the citizens went, they informed Krishna that because they thought that Satyajit was coming to see him, that they informed him of this. So Krishna anyway, then he asked Satyajit. Some arrangement was made where that he did see Satyajit, and he asked Satyajit for the jewel, for the Shamantaka jewel. Krishna's idea wasn't for himself. He didn't want the Shamantaka jewel for himself, he didn't want it. Krishna wasn't looking for the Shamantaka jewel for himself. It was actually to benefit the whole of society, if you like, rather than one person having it. And by the way, this jewel would produce huge quantities of gold. I think something like 170 pounds of gold or something every day. This actual jewel would produce like that. So rather than, two things, rather than just one person benefiting from it like Satyajit, and also rather than Satyajit being, mitigating against his ability to advance in spiritual life. Krishna was thinking, that it should be shared around. And also the point was that Krishna was trying to teach the point that everything should be offered to him. He's the owner of everything, as we just quoted from Bhagavad Gita, that he's the proprietor of everything. So us recognizing that is a really important part of us advancing in Krishna consciousness. Krishna is also known as Atmarama, so he's self-satisfied. He doesn't need anything, but we need to, one, recognize that he's the proprietor of everything, and two, then to practically demonstrate that by offering to Krishna. So every day we will offer our food, our bhoga. We will offer it to Krishna. Krishna doesn't need us to offer him bhoga. He's self-satisfied, so he doesn't need that. But for us, it's really good for our spiritual life, recognizing Krishna as the proprietor of everything, including the bhoga that we are going to eat, and then offering it to him, so as that it transforms into Krishna's mercy, prasadam, and then it helps us to benefit. The two processes, recognizing Krishna as the owner, and then the process of it transforming into prasadam or Krishna's mercy, that we then can advance in Krishna consciousness like that. So, so what Krishna wanted to do was it to be offered, but he wanted it to be offered to his representative, who was King Ugrasena in Dwarka, the king like that. Again, the understanding being that the king is the representative, or the head of state is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the material world, if you like. Of course, that only works if the king themselves are Krishna conscious and understanding that. But the principle is there, that the king or the head of state is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he was wanting Satyajit to offer the Shamantaka jewel to King Ugrasena like that. As I said, Satyajit wasn't into that. He refused to abide by that order of Krishna, and he didn't deliver the jewel to King Ugrasena. And then a little while after that, Satyajit's brother, Praseena, he again this idea of showing off, basically, and advertising the opulence of his family. His brother Satyajit himself, is that the whole family advertising their opulence. He took the jewel, put it around his neck, and he rode out on horseback around all the different areas and villages, etc. I have company with me. The windows open, have a big fly. Anyway, he rode around the whole area, basically showing off, look what we've got like that. And while he was doing this, another kind of good bit of advice for us, although I don't know it directly relates to this, but I'm just thinking showing off actually does annoy people, and therefore you can get a reaction from them if that's what you're doing. So anyway, he was doing this, and he went out even into the forests, etc., whatever, showing this off, and he was attacked. He was attacked by a lion and killed. And then after the lion had killed him, the lion was wandering off with the jewel, Not sure, I'm trying to remember, I'm not sure there's any reference to the lion having any knowledge of what the jewel was, etc. But anyway, that's what happened. And the lion wandered then into the domain of another king, the king of the apes, actually, the king of the apes. Jāmbavan was his name. And Jāmbavan, he took the jewel from the lion, and he brought it into his home. And his home was, you had to go through a big cave, big tunnel into whatever, into where his domain like that, but it was kind of difficult to get to. When Ṛṣabha is Satyajit's brother, when he didn't arrive back, because he'd been killed by the lion, didn't arrive back, many different rumours started to circulate, mainly from Satyajit. And the rumour was that because Kṛṣṇa earlier had asked Satyajit to surrender the jewel or offer the jewel to King Ugrasena, that Kṛṣṇa was envious and Kṛṣṇa wanted the jewel, and therefore Kṛṣṇa had somehow or another either killed or arranged for the killing of Ṛṣabha like that. So Kṛṣṇa was being defamed. Again, Kṛṣṇa, in one sense, that doesn't matter, that Kṛṣṇa is being defamed. He personally doesn't mind. But at the same time, for us to be defaming Kṛṣṇa is really detrimental to our spiritual life. And Kṛṣṇa actually explains that the only thing that's more detrimental is to defame his devotees, which is an incredible thing, because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet defaming him isn't as bad as defaming Kṛṣṇa's devotees. So it's just, Prabhupada talks about that so much actually, and how we need to be very careful not to offend his devotees, because it's so detrimental to our spiritual progress. But anyway, it's also detrimental to be defaming Kṛṣṇa. We're meant to be, as it's explained in today's verse, the goal of life, the most important of all things, is that we satisfy and please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So obviously we're not going to please somebody by defaming them. So Kṛṣṇa wanted to rectify that. So he decided to find out what actually happened, because obviously Kṛṣṇa knew that he hadn't killed Satyajit's brother Ṛṣabha. So he went out and tried to find out, what was going on. And eventually eventually he came to Jāmbavan's domain and could understand that Jāmbavan was involved like that. Now Jāmbavan was such an interesting personality, because he was a great devotee of Lord Ram, going back so far back. He was a great devotee of Lord Ramchandra. But somehow or other, Kṛṣṇa entering his domain in what was externally kind of an aggressive way, sort of just coming in looking for whatever. And very brave of Kṛṣṇa as well. Not many people would go into this big long tunnel, because Kṛṣṇa's Kṛṣṇa. Actually, Kṛṣṇa didn't go on his own. Sorry, I should have remembered that. Kṛṣṇa didn't go on his own. Some of the inhabitants of Dwarka came with him. But even with Kṛṣṇa, they were too afraid to go into the tunnel, into Jāmbavan's tunnel, and ultimately to Jāmbavan's home. They kind of waited at the entrance like that for Kṛṣṇa. So Kṛṣṇa went in. Jāmbavan didn't realize initially that it was Kṛṣṇa, due to it was kind of like an intruder and all that kind of thing. So he didn't realize that it was Kṛṣṇa initially, and he just became angry. And of course, when you become angry, the reality is that you kind of lose your senses. Again in the Bhagavad Gita, kama, krodas, tata, lobas, that lust, anger, and greed, they just take away our intelligence, and we just become absorbed. In fact, that verse, kama, krodas, tata, lobas, describes that there are 3 gates leading to hell: lust, anger, and greed. So Jāmbavan was overcome with anger. Yeah, so instructive actually, lust, anger, and greed, these 3 gates to hell. Somehow or another we have got to, by engaging in the process of Kṛṣṇa consciousness, chanting Hare Krishna, controlling our senses, overcome, defeat these 3 things, lust, anger, and greed, because otherwise we're obviously, 3 gates to hell, we're on the path to hell like that. Anyway, Jāmbavan had become overwhelmed with anger like that, and he didn't recognize his master, basically. Kṛṣṇa is none different than Lord Ramchandra. he didn't recognize his master, he didn't recognize Kṛṣṇa. And he started to fight. He challenged him to a fight. And Kṛṣṇa took up the challenge. Kṛṣṇa likes a good fight. We know from so many different pastimes and in different incarnations of Kṛṣṇa, fighting isn't something that he shies away from. So Kṛṣṇa took up that challenge. And Jāmbavatī at that point in this pastime, he's described as being the strongest living entity in existence. It was in one sense, externally, it was a real challenge for Kṛṣṇa. And the fight went on for 28 days, non-stop. They fought all day and they fought all night. Can you imagine that? How exhausted you would become from just fighting 24/7 for 28 days. 24 hours a day for 28 days, not 7, 4 times 7, 4 7 is 28 days like that. You would just be exhausted. And although Jāmbavatī was understood to be the strongest living entity in existence, eventually he became exhausted. Practically, his strength was reduced to zero, and he just couldn't. He'd been, pummeled by Kṛṣṇa's fists, for 28 days. He just couldn't continue. But of course, the one thought that came to his mind is, hang on a sec, I'm the strongest guy in the universe, or I'm the strongest guy, in existence. So who is this person that's fighting with me? That I'm becoming exhausted, and I've been basically defeated by this person. And then he both realized, internally, externally, everything sort of fit into place, that this was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa, that he was fighting. And Prabhupada explains also that pastime is actually of great significance to devotees, because in the beginning Jāmbavatī didn't understand it was Kṛṣṇa, and again it was due to material attachment connected to this Shamantaka jewel. I should have explained that. The Jāmbavatī, when there was an intruder coming in, he immediately thought they're coming for this jewel, because obviously he had recently attained it from the lion, and he knew that this was an extraordinary thing, this jewel, etc. It was so effulgent and producing this gold every day and all of this. So, due to material attachment, he couldn't recognize Kṛṣṇa. And no matter how strong we are, no matter how intelligent we are, etc., all of these different things, that ultimately it's the mood of surrender, the mood of humility, the mood of understanding, that we are not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that brings us. It's not our strength, it's not anything else, it's those qualities, those devotional qualities that bring us to the lotus feet of Kṛṣṇa like that. So it's a kind of an instructive thing, even though Jāmbavatī was so strong, he couldn't defeat Kṛṣṇa, and his ability to surrender to Kṛṣṇa was being blocked by his attachment, in this case to the Shamantaka jewel, but it's the same for all of us. Our attachment to material life, to material opulence, blocks us from surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But as I say, these things are also interesting, because at the same time Kṛṣṇa was very happy with Jāmbavatī, because he wanted to have a fight. Essentially for Kṛṣṇa it was a mock fight, it wasn't a real fight. Kṛṣṇa was never in danger, but he likes that. He likes that sporting kind of attitude, or sporting pastimes. And Jāmbavatī, was a great person to engage in with a fight, because he was such a powerful personality. But anyway, then Jāmbavatī completely surrendered to Kṛṣṇa. He was already, in one sense, a surrendered devotee. This was just a minor little blip, if you like, forgetting who Kṛṣṇa was and being attracted by the jewel. It was a minor little blip, and of course he completely surrendered to Kṛṣṇa. And he offered, beautiful prayers, beautiful words of glorification of Kṛṣṇa, and Kṛṣṇa was, completely satisfied. As he probably describes that in the Srimad-Bhagavatam there are many examples, and in the Krishna book many examples, whatever leads to them, and there's different reasons and different pastimes and why we get to this point, but many of those pastimes conclude with glorification of Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa being glorified by his devotees. And Prabhupada explains that actually these prayers of glorification of Kṛṣṇa are the most important part of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the most important part of of the Krishna book like that. So this glorification of Krishna is a very important thing, particularly when it's genuine and heartfelt. And usually that's the case when something dramatic has happened and brought you to that point of surrender and brought you to that point of realization. So when you get to that point, the prayers that you offer to Krishna are extremely poignant and extremely powerful, and Krishna naturally greatly appreciates them. So Krishna then explained to Jāmbavan what the story was about the Shamantaka jewel, and as you know, that it was Satyajit, etc. He was attached to it, wouldn't offer it to King Ugrasena like that. Then his brother took it, went off all around the place, the city, and then into the forest, etc. And then because I, Krishna, had asked Satyajit to surrender it to King Ugrasena, then Satyajit thought that I had killed his brother, or I was up to no good in relation to the whole thing because his brother hadn't returned, and I had somehow or other been involved in that and taken the jewel. And therefore he was defaming, and other people were believing it, this wasn't good for them, etc. So that this is why he'd come to retrieve it like that. And when Jāmbavan heard that, you know, and of course Jāmbavan had just offered these prayers to Krishna, understanding who Krishna was, none different than his worshipable Lord Ramchandra. Jāmbavan then immediately offered Krishna the Shamantaka jewel. But not only that, but he had a daughter of marriageable age, so he offered her also to Krishna to become one of his wives. So Krishna came back to Dwarka, not just with the Shamantaka jewel, but also with another wife, Jāmbavatī. Was Jāmbavan's daughter's name, Jāmbavatī. So he came back, all the citizens, well, first off he came out of Jāmbavan's domain, and the citizens who had come with him and who were waiting at the entrance, they were all really relieved because they had thought the worst, you know, that, oh my God, so just like the residents of Vrindavan would fear that when Krishna would go into the wrestling arena or deal with any of the other demons in Vrindavan, you know, their thoughts, because, you know, they were, you know, Yogamaya, they were covered to one degree or another from fully understanding the situation. So because Krishna was a young boy, they were thinking that, you know, he was vulnerable and all of that. So similar with this pastime. But when they saw Krishna coming out of the tunnel like that, they were in ecstasy, etc. So then Krishna goes back to Dwarka, and he has the Shamantaka jewel, and the whole story is kind of explained, if you like, and everything is kind of revealed to Satyajit and to all the inhabitants of Dwarka, and they understand exactly what had actually happened. And well, actually, yeah, what happened was King Ugrasena, he called for a meeting of all the important personalities in Dwarka. One of them, he invited also Satyajit, and before that whole assembly, you know, Krishna explained the whole story, the whole incident of what had happened, like that. And when Satyajit heard this, he became, you know, very, very sad, actually. He became ashamed and sad that he had wrongly accused Krishna. You know, wrongly accusing people of things is a very, I don't know what the word is, it's a very unfortunate, actually, very, very unfortunate. Or to speak of wrongly accusing Krishna of something. But it is a very unfortunate thing to wrongly accuse people, or to spread rumours about people when all the facts are not there. Even sometimes when all the facts are there and maybe someone is rightly being accused of something, the context of different situations has to be taken into consideration as well, because there may well be mitigating circumstances. But what to speak of when we just get it wrong? So Krishna here was being accused of killing Kṛṣṇa. He had nothing to do with the killing of Kṛṣṇa like that. So yeah, it's something, you know, making accusations against people, even when there is some truth, what to speak of when there's no truth to those accusations, is something that we really should be very, very mindful of and very careful not to engage in. And then particularly going back to the point earlier about offending Krishna, pretty serious thing, but Krishna says even worse than offending him is offending his devotees. So if we're dealing with devotees and we're making false accusations, you know, we are just, we're just exposing ourselves to so much difficulty in our own lives, and indeed going forward in our future lives. And Krishna doesn't forget it. You know, it's like there's so many pastimes of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya where devotees have offended the other devotees, and then they come and beg for mercy from Krishna, but Krishna's response, or Lord Chaitanya's response, is, no, I cannot forgive you. You have to go and beg forgiveness from the person that you have offended, or the person that you have done wrong to. So that's always going to have to be done in order for you to then unblock that blockage in your own devotional path. So basically, this pastime is such a good example for us to be aware of that, and to really at all costs not fall into that trap of offending devotees. And of course, you know, we can offend devotees in different ways, but a pretty serious offense is to accuse them of something that they're not guilty of, that they're not involved with, as in the case here of Krishna like that. So anyway, when the whole story was explained, Satyajit was so ashamed of what had done, and both in terms of accusing Krishna, but being you know, attracted by materialism or material life like that, in terms of the Shamantaka jewel, and he sincerely wanted then to rectify it. This is the beauty of these pastimes, that they outline, you know, what the problem was, what led to the problem, what the problem was, what the person's consciousness was that was part of the problem, etc. But then also nicely explains how the whole situation became rectified. So Satyajit then did the very same as Jambavan, that he, you know, of course Krishna had the jewel at this point, but you know, Satyajit, it was quote unquote Satyajit's jewel, if you like. So he then acquiesced to Krishna's original request to offer it to King Ugrasena. So that was done. And then the other part was that he offered his daughter to Krishna. And his daughter was Satyabhama, as we're talking about in today's verse and purport. So in that sense, everything worked out well in the end, and that's always the case when anything connected to Krishna is ultimately glorious. Even if externally it seems not to be at any point in time, ultimately it's all glorious. These are all Krishna's pastimes. So everything was fine. So I think I'll conclude there. What time are we at? Yeah, I think I'll conclude there. So going back to just to repeat the very beginning, at the very beginning, that Krishna owns everything. Everything in the whole cosmic manifestation is Krishna's, created by Krishna, and therefore Krishna is the proprietor of it all. So whatever we have in this world, yes, we can use it. We can use whatever we have in this world, but the idea is always to understand that it's created and owned ultimately by Krishna, and two, yes, we can use it, but we should use it also in Krishna's service, like that. And then our lives become perfect. We shouldn't be like, you know, Satyajit, Praseena, or indeed even Jambavan initially. We shouldn't be like any of them thinking, it's mine, I own it, I'm keeping it. That. At all times we should understand that everything is owned by Krishna, and we just have it for some short period of time. And obviously we need to keep body and soul together. We need to, you know, eat and sleep, etc. So yes, Krishna's fine, there's no problem with that. But always to understand that everything is emanating, coming from Krishna. And you know, as we've probably talked about many, many times before, if you think about the world that we live in, and all the different, you know, wars and fighting that goes on in the material world, ultimately it's all about ownership. What people own, and then they want to protect it, so they want to keep others out. You see in the world, you know, in our modern world, particularly in countries that we live in, like Western Europe, you know, North America, places like that, you know, they're always trying to keep out, you know, what they call migrants like that, because, you know, this is ours, we're protecting it. And then the other thing is that, you know, when people just take something from somebody else, you know, and disputes over land, I mean, that's what basically where all wars come from ultimately. Disputes over property, disputes over land. But the consciousness is, this is mine. Ireland is mine. I was born here. I am Irish. Therefore, I have rights over this more so than anybody else. But this is all illusion. You know, we're not Irish, we're not, you know, European, we're not American, we're not Australasian, and, you know, we're not anything else, you know. We're eternal spirit souls, we're all equal on the spiritual platform. We didn't create the land that we live in. We can't create that. We might be able to create, you know, computers and mobile phones, you know, and different things by manipulating different elements. But the core elements of earth, water, fire, air, ether, we can't create those. Impossible. We just cannot create them. We cannot create earth, we cannot create water, we cannot create fire, we cannot create earth, water, fire, air, we cannot create air, we cannot create ether, we cannot create space like that. These things are all naturally occurring material elements, and they're coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So yes, we can take them, we can manipulate them and create so many different things as a result of that. Excuse me? But that doesn't mean we're the creator, and it certainly doesn't mean that we're the owner. So if we can always live our lives in that consciousness of understanding that we are just benefiting from Krishna's creation, and therefore to whatever degree we benefit from Krishna's creation, we understand that and we offer it back to Krishna as an offering, then our lives will be, I was going to say perfect, and they will be perfect if we do that perfectly. But basically we'll be on the right track if we have that clear understanding and that humility to then offer everything back to whom it rightly belongs. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. See you next time. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.